The sky above Stormwind City tore open like parchment held to flame. Not the sickening green of feel energy that citizens had learned to fear, nor the purple shimmer of arcane portals that mages conjured daily in the Mage Quarter. This was something else entirely. A rupture in reality itself that radiated red, white, and blue light in concentric circles, pulsing with an energy that made the city's protective wards scream in protest. On the battlements of Stormwind Keep, Commander Marcus Valorgard gripped the stone Merlin as warning bells erupted across every tower and gate. The SI-7 operative at his side, a woman named Raven Shadowstrike, already had her hand on the communication crystal that linked directly to King Anduin Rin's throne room. "Report," Valorgard demanded, his weathered face turned skyward. "Unknown anomaly, sir," replied the tower's resident mage, an elderly human named Archmage Kelton, whose hands trembled as he consulted his scrying orb. "The dimensional fabric is compromised, but there's no fiel signature, no void resonance, no connection to the twisting nether at all." Valorgard's augmented sight, a gift from a gnomish engineer after losing his left eye to a burning blade orc, focused on the rift. Through its center, something was falling. A figure, humanoid, descending through clouds with arms outstretched as though trying to slow the fall through sheer will. "In the light's name," Kelton whispered, making a warding gesture. "What manner of being survives passage through the raw space between worlds?" The figure struck the cobblestones of the cathedral square with force enough to crack the ancient stonework. Dust billowed outward, and the crowd of priests, paladins, and common folk who had been going about their daily prayers scattered in terror. When the dust cleared, a man rose to his feet, brushing off his unusual garments with casual motions. He wore a suit of blue that seemed almost ceremonial, with white star emblazoned on his chest and stripes of red and white running down his torso. On his left arm, he carried a circular shield unlike anything in Azeroth's armories. Perfectly round, colored in concentric circles of red, white, and blue, with a star at its center. The man himself appeared human, though his bearing spoke of military discipline, and his physique suggested enhancement beyond normal training. Commander Valorgard signaled to the city guard. "Full containment. Non-lethal if possible. Lethal if necessary." 50 Stormwind guards poured into Cathedral Square, their plate armor clanking as they formed a perimeter around the stranger. Captain Thaddeus Ironforge, a veteran of both Scourge invasions and the campaign in Northrend, stepped forward with his hammer raised. "By order of the Alliance and King Anduin Rin, identify yourself and state your purpose in our city." The stranger looked around, taking in the Gothic architecture of the Cathedral of Light, the towering keep in the distance, the canals flowing with clean water. His expression showed confusion rather than hostility. "I'm Captain Steve Rogers," he said, his voice carrying an accent unfamiliar to anyone present, formal, with pronunciations that seemed somehow antiquated. "United States Army. I was pursuing a hostile entity through what appeared to be some kind of spatial anomaly, and where exactly am I?" "You stand in Stormwind City, jewel of the Alliance, heart of the human kingdoms of Azeroth," Thaddeus replied, though his hammer did not lower. "And you will surrender your weapons and submit to—" Rogers raised his free hand in a placating gesture. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I don't even know where here is. One moment I was in New York, the next I was falling through, whatever that was." He gestured upward, where the rift was already beginning to seal itself, reality knitting back together with visible effort. Raven Shadowstrike appeared from the shadows beside Commander Valorguard, having teleported from the keep using a rogue's shadow step. The king wants him contained and brought to the throne room. Immediately. Captain Rogers, Valorguard called down from the battlements, his voice amplified by a speaking stone. We mean you no harm, but we must ask you to accompany these guards to meet with our sovereign. You have entered our world under unusual circumstances, and we have questions that require answers. Rogers looked at the 50 armed guards surrounding him, then at the growing crowd of curious citizens being held back by additional reinforcements. He seemed to be calculating odds, assessing threats, making tactical decisions. Then he nodded and attached his shield to the magnetic mount on his back. All right, I'll come peacefully, but I'd appreciate it if someone could explain what's going on here. This doesn't look like anywhere on Earth I've ever seen. Earth? Archmage Kelton muttered to Valorguard. There's no realm by that name in any of my dimensional charts. As the guards escorted Rogers through the city streets toward Stormwind Keep, citizens pressed against windows and lined the canal bridges to catch a glimpse of the strange warrior. Word spread through the city with remarkable speed, carried by gossip and crystalline communication devices alike. A man in bizarre colors who fell from a hole in the sky. A warrior bearing a shield unlike any forged by human, dwarven, or gnomish smiths. In the depths of Stormwind's underbelly, where SI-7 maintained their intelligence network, agents were already compiling reports. In the Mage Quarter, archmages consulted ancient tomes on planar travel and dimensional theory. In the Cathedral of Light, Archbishop Benedictus, still untainted by the old gods in this timeline, knelt before the altar and prayed for guidance in understanding this omen. And in the throne room of Stormwind Keep, King Anduin Rin stood from his throne as the massive doors swung open and guards escorted their unusual prisoner inside. Anduin was young for a king, his blonde hair and kind features often causing others to underestimate his wisdom and resolve. But the trials he had endured, the loss of his father Varian, the Legion's invasion, the war with the Horde, had forged him into a leader who commanded respect. At his right hand stood Prophet Velen, the ancient Draenei, whose millennia of experience lent weight to the king's decisions. At his left stood Gen Greymane, Lord of Gilneas, whose lupine features and gruff demeanor concealed a fierce loyalty to Anduin and the Alliance. Your Majesty, Rogers said, and to everyone's surprise, he gave a respectful nod. Not quite a bow, but an acknowledgement of authority. I apologize for the intrusion. I'm trying to understand what's happened and how I can get back home. Anduin descended from the throne platform, studying Rogers with eyes that held both curiosity and caution. You say you are from a place called Earth, Captain Rogers? Yes, sir. Though I'm starting to suspect it's not the same Earth as wherever I am now. Velen stepped forward, his luminous eyes, windows to vast psychic power, narrowing as they examined Rogers. Fascinating. You carry no fell taint, no void corruption, no curse of undeath. Your spirit burns with righteousness and purpose. The prophet's expression grew troubled. Yet the manner of your arrival suggests forces at work beyond even my understanding. Can you tell us about this hostile entity you were pursuing? Anduin asked. Rogers described the battle in New York, though he kept details vague. A creature that could tear holes in space, a fight across city blocks, a desperate chase through a portal that closed behind him. As he spoke, Gen Greymane growled low in his throat. A creature that manipulates dimensional barriers, That's either extremely advanced magic, or something worse. Or technology, Rogers added. Where I come from, we've encountered entities with abilities that blur the line between science and what you might call magic. The throne room doors burst open again. A gnome in elaborate robes practically vibrated with excitement as she scurried toward the throne. Your Majesty, Archmage Khadgar has just contacted me via the Kirin Tor communication network. He's detected massive fluctuations in the ley lines around Stormwind. Whatever opened that portal didn't just tear through space, it punched through the barriers between entire realities. Anduin's expression grew grave. Could it happen again? The gnome mage, chronicler Lisbeth Sparkfizzle, one of Stormwind's foremost experts on planar magic, wrung her hands. Unknown, Your Majesty. We're in completely uncharted territory here. We need to study the residual energy signatures, consult with the Kirin Tor, possibly even reach out to the Bronze Dragonflight for... A thunderous explosion rocked the keep. The assembled court stumbled, and guards drew weapons. Through the tall windows, they could see smoke rising from the Dwarven district. What now? Genn snarled. Commander Valorgard burst into the throne room, his face flushed from running. Your Majesty, the Defia's Brotherhood has launched a coordinated assault on 3 fronts. They're hitting the Dwarven district, the Trade district, and they've somehow gotten forces inside the canals. It's the largest attack they've attempted since their formation. Rogers was already moving toward the door. I can help. Captain Rogers, wait, Anduin began. But the soldier was already gone, his enhanced speed carrying him down the corridor at a pace that left the guards scrambling to keep up. In the Dwarven district, chaos reigned. Defia's thugs, outcasts and criminals who had once been honest laborers before Edwin Van Cleef turned them toward banditry, poured through the streets with swords, daggers, and crude firearms called blunderbusses. They wore their distinctive red bandanas and leather armor, and their attack was clearly coordinated to cause maximum damage. Shop fronts burned. Citizens fled screaming. The district's dwarven defenders, stout warriors armed with axes and hammers, had formed a defensive line at the entrance to the Dwarven Quarter's Great Forge, but they were being pushed back by sheer numbers. Rogers emerged from a side street, shield on his arm, and immediately assessed the tactical situation. Approximately 60 hostiles, mixed capabilities, targeting civilians and infrastructure. Defensive line about to collapse. Multiple fires spreading. Civilian casualties mounting. Everyone get back, he shouted to the Dwarven defenders. Let me handle this. And who might you be, lad? Called back a dwarf with a magnificent red beard, even as he brought his hammer down on a Defias thug's skull. We don't need some fancy-dressed human getting in our way. Rogers didn't answer. He charged forward, shield raised, and slammed into the front rank of Defias attackers with the force of a battering ram. Bodies flew backward, bones cracking from the impact. The thugs behind them hesitated, confused by this new combatant in his strange blue uniform. Get him! Screamed a Defias captain. He's just one man. They learned quickly how wrong they were. Rogers moved through them like a force of nature, his shield deflecting sword strikes and bullets alike. A thug swung a two-handed axe at his head. Rogers ducked and drove his fist into the man's solar plexus with precisely calculated force, enough to incapacitate, not kill. Another rushed him from behind. Rogers spun and threw his shield in a perfect arc that struck 3 attackers before ricocheting off a wall and returning to his hand. The Dwarven defenders watched in stunned silence as this unknown warrior dismantled their attackers with clinical efficiency. Rogers wasn't fighting with rage or bloodlust. He moved with the precision of someone who had trained for decades, who understood human anatomy and knew exactly where to strike to end a fight without ending a life. Within 5 minutes, every Defias thug in the Dwarven district was either unconscious or fleeing in terror. Rogers stood in the center of the street, breathing normally despite the exertion, shield still pristine despite blocking dozens of attacks. The red-bearded dwarf approached cautiously. "By Magni's beard, I've never seen anything like that. The way you moved, the way that shield came back to your hand. Are you some kind of paladin?" "Just a soldier," Rogers replied, scanning the area for additional threats. "Is everyone all right? Any civilians hurt?" "A few injuries, nothing fatal thanks to your intervention." The dwarf extended a gauntleted hand. "Name's Torgan Ironforge, captain of the Dwarven District Guard. We're in your debt, stranger." Rogers shook his hand. "Steve Rogers. And I'm just doing what anyone should do, helping people who need it." Before Torgan could respond, a squad of Stormwind guards arrived, led by Commander Valorgard himself. The commander took in the scene. Dozens of unconscious criminals, minimal structural damage, no fatalities, and his eyes widened. "Captain Rogers, you did this? Alone?" "The situation required immediate action, sir. I hope I didn't overstep." Valorgard looked at Torgan, who nodded emphatically. "The lad saved lives, Commander. Moved like nothing I've seen outside the champions who fought at Ice Crown Citadel." News of the incident spread even faster than the arrival had. By the time Rogers returned to Stormwind Keep, this time without guards, as Anduin had sent word that he was to be treated as a guest rather than a prisoner, the throne room was filled with advisors, military commanders, and representatives from various alliance factions. "Captain Rogers," Anduin said as he entered, and this time there was genuine warmth in his voice. "You have our thanks. Commander Valorgard tells me you subdued nearly 60 Defias attackers without a single fatality." "I don't believe in unnecessary killing, Your Majesty. Those men were criminals, but they don't deserve death for their crimes. Where I come from, we have systems for justice that don't require execution." This statement caused murmurs among the assembled nobles and military leaders. Gen Greymane looked skeptical. "A noble sentiment, Captain. But I wonder how long you'll maintain it once you've seen the true horrors this world contains." Prophet Velen raised a hand for silence. "I have consulted with the Naru Adal through our crystalline communion. The entities of light are intrigued by Captain Rogers's presence. They say his spirit resonates with righteousness, but it is righteousness of a different character than our paladins possess. Not granted by the light, but chosen by him, earned. The Kirin Tor has completed preliminary analysis of the dimensional breach," Chronicler Sparkfizzle announced, reading from a scroll that hovered before her via levitation magic. "Archmage Khadgar believes that with sufficient study, we might be able to reverse the process and return Captain Rogers to his home reality. However, such research could take months, perhaps years." Rogers's expression fell slightly, but he nodded. "I understand. In the meantime, is there somewhere I can stay? And perhaps someone could explain more about this world. I'm still trying to understand where I am and what I've gotten myself into." "You'll stay in the keep as our honored guest," Anduin declared. "And I'll assign someone to help orient you to Azeroth and its complexities." That someone turned out to be a young human woman named Sarah Lightbringer, a distant cousin of the famous Uther, who served as a chronicler and historian in Stormwind's extensive libraries. She was intelligent, patient, and had a gift for explaining complicated concepts in simple terms. Over the next 3 days, Sarah walked Rogers through Azeroth's history. The War of the Ancients, the Sundering, the rise of the Horde, the Scourge invasion, the Burning Legion, the Cataclysm, and recent conflicts with the Iron Horde and Legion. Rogers listened with the focus of someone trained in military intelligence, asking clarifying questions and making mental notes. "So let me make sure I understand," he said on the third evening, as they sat in the library overlooking Stormwind Harbor. "Your world has been under constant assault from various hostile forces for thousands of years. Demons from a place called the Twisting Nether. Undead controlled by something called the Lich King. Old gods imprisoned beneath the earth that corrupt everything they touch. And your own factions, Alliance and Horde, spend as much time fighting each other as fighting these existential threats." Sarah nodded sadly. "That's an accurate summary, yes. That's insane. Don't your leaders see that unity would make you stronger against these threats?" "Many do. King Anduin works tirelessly for peace with the Horde. But there's too much history, too much blood spilled on both sides. Trust is in short supply." Rogers was quiet for a long moment. "Where I come from, we had a saying during the war: united we stand, divided we fall. Your world needs that unity more than mine ever did." On the fourth day, that need became apparent in the worst possible way. The attack came without warning. A dark portal, smaller than the massive gateway that connected Azeroth to Draenor, but no less threatening, erupted in the middle of the trade district. Through it poured demons, Felguards with their massive axes, Wrathguards wielding twin blades, fell hunters that could drain magic from their victims, and towering infernals that crashed to earth like living meteors. This was no minor incursion. This was a legion assault, coordinated and overwhelming, the city's defensive wards. Weakened by the dimensional breach that had brought Rogers to Azeroth, crumpled under the demonic onslaught. Rogers was in the keep when the alarm bells rang. He didn't wait for orders, didn't ask permission. He simply grabbed his shield and ran toward the trade district with the speed of someone enhanced beyond normal human limits. The scene that greeted him was carnage. Demons rampaged through the streets, their fell green flames setting buildings ablaze. Citizens fled in terror, while guards and paladins tried desperately to mount a defense. He saw a mother shielding her child from a Felguard's axe, saw paladins crushed beneath infernal fists, saw mages overwhelmed by fell hunters that drained their power and left them helpless. A massive infernal, easily 15 feet tall and composed of burning stone, turned its attention to a group of civilians huddled in a collapsed building. It raised both fists to smash them into pulp. Rogers's shield struck it in the back of the head with enough force to shatter its skull. The infernal stumbled, confused, as Rogers caught his returning shield and charged forward. He leaped, bringing the shield's edge down on the demon's head with devastating impact. The infernal collapsed, its fell fire extinguishing as it died. The civilians stared in shock as Rogers helped them to their feet. "Get to the keep, now. The guards will protect you there." "But the demons," a woman began. "I'll handle the demons. Go." Rogers turned to face the horde that had noticed his intervention. At least 30 demons of various types advanced on his position, their roars and shrieks promising agony. Behind them, the dark portal continued to disgorge more reinforcements. "All right," Rogers said, settling his shield on his arm. "Let's do this." He charged forward to meet them. A Felguard swung its massive axe in an overhead strike that could have cleaved a horse in two. Rogers raised his shield and the axe shattered against it. Not just deflected, but destroyed, the metal fracturing from the force of impact. He followed through with a punch to the demon's midsection that sent it flying backward into 3 of its companions. A Wrathguard attacked from his left, twin blades moving in a blur of fell-edged steel. Rogers parried one blade with his shield and caught the other with his bare hand. The demon's eyes widened in disbelief before Rogers headbutted it with enough force to crack its skull. He spun, throwing the demon into a group of advancing field hunters. The Stormwind defenders watched in awe as this lone warrior carved through the demon ranks with ruthless efficiency. Paladins were trained for years to fight demons, empowered by the light itself, yet they struggled to survive against such numbers. This stranger in his strange blue uniform fought with a confidence that bordered on casual, as though the outcome had never been in doubt. Commander Valorguard coordinated the defense from a fortified position, directing guards and mages to support Rogers's assault. "Focus your fire on the portal. We need to close it before more reinforcements arrive." But the mages found their efforts blocked. A figure emerged from the dark portal, a demon of higher rank than the mindless fell guards and fell hunters. It stood 8 feet tall, with crimson skin and curling horns, dressed in elaborate armor that seemed to be part of its flesh. An Eredar, one of the Legion's most powerful sorcerers. "Foolish mortals!" the Eredar boomed, its voice echoing across the district. "The Burning Legion will consume this world as it has consumed countless others. Your resistance only delays the inevitable." Rogers had just finished dispatching the last of the lesser demons when the Eredar raised its hands and unleashed a wave of feel energy. The green fire swept across the street, incinerating everything in its path. Guards screamed as their flesh melted. Paladins raised holy shields that shattered under the assault. Rogers braced himself and held his shield before him. The fell fire struck the shield and simply stopped, dissipating harmlessly against the vibranium alloy, as though it were nothing more than ordinary flame. When the assault ended, Rogers stood unharmed in the center of a blast zone that had killed dozens of Alliance defenders. The Eredar stared in disbelief. "Impossible. No mortal can withstand the pure essence of fell energy. What are you?" "Someone who's fought worse than you," Rogers replied. He threw his shield with all his strength. The vibranium disc struck the Eredar in the chest with a sound like a thunderclap. The demon staggered, its concentration broken. The dark portal flickered and began to destabilize. Rogers caught his returning shield and charged forward, closing the distance before the Eredar could recover. "You cannot!" the demon began. Rogers's fist connected with its jaw. The Eredar's head snapped back, its neck breaking with an audible crack. The powerful sorcerer, terror of countless worlds, crumpled to the ground dead. With its death, the dark portal collapsed in on itself, sealing shut and trapping the remaining demons on this side, where Stormwind's defenders could finish them. Silence fell over the trade district, broken only by the crackling of fires and the moans of the wounded. Survivors emerged from hiding, staring at Rogers as he stood amid the demon corpses. His uniform was singed, but intact. His shield bore not a single scratch, and his expression showed nothing but concern for those around him. "Is anyone hurt? Someone get healers to the wounded? We need to contain these fires before they spread." Prophet Velen arrived moments later, accompanied by a cadre of priests and paladins. The ancient Draenei looked at the scene. Dozens of dead demons, the collapsed portal, Rogers standing calm and collected at the center of it all, and his luminous eyes widened. By the light, Velen breathed. The Eridar alone could have slaughtered everyone here. I sensed its power from the keep. Yet you struck it down as though it were nothing more than a common thug. It was threatening innocent people, Rogers said simply. That's all that mattered. That night, the throne room overflowed with people. Representatives from every Alliance faction had arrived to witness King Anduin's council. Dwarves from Ironforge, Night Elves from Darnassus, Draenei from the Exodar, Gnomes from Nomerigan, and Worgen from Gilneas. All had heard the reports of the mysterious warrior who had single-handedly repelled a Legion assault. The question before us, Anduin addressed the assembly, is what do we do with this information? Captain Rogers has proven himself a powerful ally, but his presence raises concerns. He's too powerful, said a Night Elf Sentinel commander. One person should not wield such strength. It upsets the balance. Balance? Gen Greymane scoffed. The Legion doesn't care about balance. They'll throw everything they have at us. We need every advantage we can get. But is he an advantage or a risk? Asked a dwarven thane. What if he decides to use that power against us? What if the corruption of Azeroth, the old gods, N'Zoth's whispers, the curse of flesh, what if they turn him? Roger stood to the side of the throne, listening to them debate his fate as though he weren't there. Finally, he stepped forward. Excuse me, Your Majesty, but I can hear you all, and I understand your concerns. He looked around at the assembled leaders. Where I come from, I was given an experimental treatment that made me stronger, faster, more resilient than any normal human. That power came with responsibility. I swore an oath to use my abilities to protect people, to stand up to bullies and tyrants, to never abuse the trust people placed in me. Fine words, said the Night Elf commander. But words are easy. Actions define us. Then judge me by my actions, Rogers replied. I've been on your world for less than a week. I've fought criminals who were threatening your people. I've fought demons that were slaughtering innocents. I haven't asked for payment, haven't demanded authority, haven't tried to impose my will on anyone. I just want to help until I can get home. Anduin stood from his throne. Captain Rogers, you have proven yourself an ally to the Alliance. We would be honored if you would continue to aid us until the mages can find a way to return you to your world. In exchange, we offer you sanctuary, resources, and whatever knowledge we can provide about dimensional travel. Rogers nodded. I accept, Your Majesty. Thank you. However, Anduin continued, his expression growing serious, I must ask something of you. The Horde and Alliance are technically at peace, but tensions remain high. If you encounter Horde forces, I ask that you show the same restraint you've shown with the Defias. No matter how different they may seem, they are people trying to survive in a hostile world, just as we are. Understood, sir. I didn't come here to fight your wars. I came here by accident. But while I'm here, I'll defend anyone who needs defending, regardless of which faction they belong to. This statement caused murmurs among the assembled leaders, but Anduin smiled. That is all we can ask. Over the following days, Rogers became a fixture in Stormwind. He helped repair damage from the demon attack. He trained with the city guard, teaching them techniques from his world that could help them survive against superior opponents. He spent hours in the library with Sarah, learning everything he could about Azeroth's threats and challenges. And people began to notice him. Common citizens who had seen him fight, who had heard stories of his heroism. They started calling him the Champion in Blue, the Shield Bearer, the Soldier of Light, though Rogers consistently corrected that last one, explaining he wasn't empowered by the light, but by science. In the Pig and Whistle Tavern, a popular gathering place for Stormwind's working class, Rogers sat at a corner table nursing a drink that Sarah had called Dwarven Stout, but which tasted nothing like any beer he'd known back home. A young woman approached hesitantly, a barmaid named Eliza, who had been trapped in her home during the demon attack. "Excuse me, sir, but are you the one they called the Champion in Blue?" Rogers looked up, slightly embarrassed by the title. "I'm Steve Rogers, yes. Can I help you with something? I just wanted to thank you. My family lives in the Trade District. If you hadn't stopped those demons..." She trailed off, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "They would have died. My mother, my little brother. So thank you. Thank you for saving them." "I'm glad I could help," Rogers said gently. "Your family is safe. That's what matters." After Eliza left, Sarah sat down across from him. "You're becoming quite famous, you know. People are starting to tell stories about you. Some are even saying you're a messenger from the light sent to protect us during dark times." Rogers grimaced. "I'm not a messenger from anything. I'm just a soldier who ended up in the wrong place." "Maybe," Sarah said thoughtfully. "Or maybe you ended up in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. Azeroth has a way of drawing heroes when they're needed most. I'm not a hero. I'm just..." An explosion shook the tavern. Patrons screamed as the windows shattered inward. Rogers was already moving, shield raised to protect Sarah from the flying glass. Outside, screams erupted across the city. They ran into the street to find chaos descending once again. But this time it wasn't demons or criminals. The canals of Stormwind had begun to overflow, water surging through the streets with unnatural force. And rising from that water came creatures of living rot. Undead abominations, ghouls, necromancers in rotting robes, and towering bone constructs. "The Scourge," Sarah gasped. "But how? The Lich King was defeated years ago. The Scourge should be scattered and leaderless." A Death Knight appeared at the head of the undead army, mounted on a skeletal horse and wreathed in frost and shadow. Its armor was black and spiked, and its eyes glowed with unholy blue light. When it spoke, its voice carried the chill of the grave. "The Lich King may be gone, but death is eternal. We have sensed a disturbance in the fabric of reality. We have come to claim this anomaly for our master's heir." Rogers stepped forward, positioning himself between the Death Knight and the fleeing civilians. "I don't know what you are, but you need to leave, now." The Death Knight laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "You dare command me, mortal? I am Lord Karthus, once a paladin of the Silver Hand, now a champion of undeath. I have slain dragons and demons. What are you but flesh waiting to rot?" "I'm Captain America," Rogers replied, settling into a fighting stance. "And I don't care how many titles you have. You're threatening innocent people, and that means you're going to have a bad day." Karthus raised his rune blade, and the undead horde surged forward. Ghouls scrambled over each other in their eagerness to reach Rogers. Necromancers began casting spells that raised skeletal warriors from the cobblestones. Abominations lumbered forward, their stitched-together bodies dripping with toxic fluids. Rogers met them head-on. His shield blocked a ghoul's claws, his fist crushed its skull. He spun and threw the shield in a wide arc that decapitated 6 skeletal warriors before returning to his hand. An abomination swung a massive cleaver. Rogers ducked under it and drove his fist into the creature's midsection with enough force to rupture the stitching that held it together. The abomination collapsed, spilling its toxic contents across the street. Stormwind's defenders rallied. Paladins arrived with holy light blazing, turning undead with righteous fury. Mages cast fireballs and arcane missiles. Guards formed shield walls and thrust with spears. But Rogers moved through them all like a force of nature, dismantling the undead assault with mechanical precision. Lord Karthus watched his army being destroyed and snarled with frustration. He spurred his skeletal mount forward, rune blade raised to strike. The Death Knight was fast, faster than anything human had a right to be, but Rogers was faster. He sidestepped the blade and slammed his shield into the horse's skull, shattering bone and sending Karthus tumbling from his mount. The Death Knight rose, frost gathering around his armored fists. Impossible. You move like a champion of the light, yet you carry no holy power. What are you? I told you already, Rogers said, advancing steadily. I'm Captain America, and I don't need holy power to stop you. Karthus unleashed a wave of frost that would have frozen a normal human solid. Rogers raised his shield, and the ice shattered against vibranium, unable to affect the metal or the man behind it. He closed the distance and drove his fist into Karthus's chest plate with enough force to dent the ensorcelled armor. The Death Knight staggered back, dark magic crackling around his form as he attempted to drain Rogers's life force. The spell connected. Rogers felt a momentary chill. But the Death Knight's eyes widened in shock as the drain had minimal effect. Whatever enhancements ran through Rogers's blood, they resisted the necromantic magic that would have killed a normal person in seconds. This cannot be, Karthus gasped. You resist death itself. What are you? Rogers grabbed the Death Knight by the throat. Someone who's really tired of that question. He hurled Karthus into the canal with enough force to create a massive splash. The Death Knight surfaced, water streaming from his armor, but Rogers was already there. He brought his shield down on Karthus's head like a hammer. Once. Twice. On the third strike, the Death Knight's helmet cracked, and the blue glow in his eyes extinguished. With their leader destroyed, the remaining undead forces lost coherence. The necromancer's control faltered, and the mindless undead began wandering aimlessly. Stormwind's defenders quickly finished them off, while priests moved through the streets, consecrating the ground to prevent the corpses from rising again. Commander Valorgard found Rogers standing in the canal, water up to his waist, shield still in hand. Captain Rogers, you just killed a Death Knight. Alone. Those are among the most dangerous enemies we face. Champions of Death require entire raids of heroes to defeat. Rogers climbed out of the water, his uniform dripping but otherwise undamaged. He was threatening civilians. Someone had to stop him. But how did you resist the death magic? Even our most powerful paladins struggle against a Death Knight's necromantic abilities. Rogers shrugged. The serum that enhanced me back home did more than just make me stronger. It optimized every cell in my body. I guess that includes resistance to whatever that was. In the days following the Scourge attack, the whispers about Rogers grew louder. He had defeated criminals. He had destroyed demons. Now he had killed a Death Knight who had once been a powerful paladin. The common people of Stormwind began gathering in Cathedral Square each evening, hoping for a glimpse of the champion in blue. Some brought offerings, food, drinks, trinkets, as though he were a religious figure. This troubled Rogers deeply. He spoke to Sarah about it in the library one evening, away from the crowds. They're treating me like some kind of savior. They shouldn't do that. I'm just a soldier doing my job. Sarah looked at him with sympathy. To them, you are a savior. Azeroth has been under siege for so long. We've lost so many heroes. Uther, Tyrion Fordring, Varian Rin, countless others. People are desperate for hope, for someone who can stand against the darkness without falling to corruption. But I'm not incorruptible. No one is. And I'm not even from this world. What happens when I leave? They'll feel abandoned. Perhaps, Sarah said quietly. But maybe while you're here, you can give them something more valuable than protection. You can give them an example of what heroism looks like. Not power for power's sake, but strength used in service of others. Before Rogers could respond, the doors to the library burst open. A gnome messenger sprinted in, his mechanical legs whirring as he skidded to a halt. Captain Rogers, His Majesty requests your immediate presence in the war room. We have a situation. The war room of Stormwind Keep was filled with grim-faced military commanders and advisors. King Anduin stood before a massive map of Azeroth that hovered in the air via magical projection. Red markers indicated areas of concern, and there were far too many of them. Captain Rogers, Anduin said as he entered, thank you for coming so quickly. We have a developing crisis that requires immediate response. Gen Greymane stepped forward, pointing to a location on the map. The Red Ridge Mountains, a region southeast of Stormwind. 3 hours ago, we lost contact with Lakeshire, the main settlement in Red Ridge. Our scouts report that a massive orc warband, over 5,000 strong, has descended from the burning steppes. They're led by a warlord named Gartok Skullsplitter, who claims to be gathering an army to challenge both Alliance and Horde leadership. 5,000 orcs, Rogers repeated, studying the map. What kind of defenses does Lakeshire have? Minimal, Commander Valorgard admitted. Perhaps 200 militia, a small garrison of Stormwind guards. And whatever adventurers happen to be in the area, they cannot hold against those numbers. We're mobilizing the 7th Legion, Anduin said, but they won't arrive for at least 12 hours. By then, Lakeshire could be destroyed and thousands of civilians killed. Rogers looked at the king. You want me to go there? Buy time until your reinforcements arrive. I would not ask if there were any other option, Anduin said quietly. I know you didn't come here to fight our wars, but those people need help now, and you're the only one who can reach them in time. Rogers studied the map for a moment longer, then nodded. I'll go. But I'll need transport. How far is it? By Griffin, about an hour, Valorgard replied. But Captain, 5,000 orcs. Even you? I've fought worse odds, Rogers interrupted. And I won't have to defeat them all. I just need to hold them until your reinforcements arrive. 12 hours, you said? Possibly less if we push the march. But yes, 12 hours is the estimate. Then I'd better get moving. The Griffin flight to Lakeshire gave Rogers time to think about what he was walking into. The massive lion-eagle hybrid that served as his mount seemed nervous around him, as though it could sense something unusual about its rider. Through the clouds, he could see the Red Ridge Mountains rising in the distance, beautiful in a rugged way, but he could already see smoke rising from the direction of Lakeshire. The Griffin landed on the town's fortified watchtower, just as the first waves of orcs reached the barricades. Rogers leaped down and immediately assessed the situation. The town was built on the shore of a large lake, with wooden walls reinforced with stone at key points. The defenders had established a perimeter, but they were already being pushed back by the sheer weight of numbers. The orcs of this warband were larger and more brutal than any Rogers had seen in history books about World War II. They stood 7 feet tall on average, with green or gray skin, prominent tusks, and muscles that bulged with unnatural strength. They wielded massive axes, swords, and warhammers, and their armor was a patchwork of scavenged pieces from different sources. At the center of the warband, a towering figure directed the assault. Gartok Skullsplitter stood over 8 feet tall. his body covered in ritual scars and trophies taken from defeated enemies. He wore the skull of some massive beast as a helmet, and his weapon was a two-handed axe that looked like it weighed more than an average human. "People of Lakeshire!" Rogers shouted from the watchtower, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "I'm Captain Steve Rogers, sent by King Anduin. Help is coming, but we need to hold until it arrives. Fall back to the secondary defensive positions and let me handle the first wave." "Are you mad?" shouted back a dwarf commander who was bleeding from multiple wounds. "There's thousands of them. I've seen worse. Trust me and fall back." Rogers leaped from the watchtower, a 30-foot drop that would have shattered a normal person's legs. He landed in a crouch, absorbing the impact, then stood and raised his shield as the first orcs reached him. The battle that followed would become legend in the Red Ridge Mountains. Rogers stood at the primary barricade point, a narrow bridge across a stream that the orcs had to cross to reach the town proper. He made himself an immovable object, his shield deflecting axe blows that could have split trees. Every orc that reached him fell, either from precise strikes that incapacitated without killing, or from the devastating impact of his shield bash. The orcs came in waves. 10, 20, 50, 100. Bodies began to pile up on the bridge, creating an additional obstacle that slowed the advance. The defenders watched in awe as this lone warrior held a choke point against an entire army. Gartok Skullsplitter saw his warriors falling and roared with fury. "What cowardice is this? You hide behind these weaklings? Face me yourself, little human." Rogers looked up at the massive warlord. "I'm trying to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Order your warriors to withdraw, and I'll guarantee safe passage back to wherever you came from." The warlord's laughter boomed across the battlefield. "You offer me terms? I am Gartok, slayer of 100 champions. I have crushed paladins beneath my boot and torn mages limb from limb. You are nothing but meat." "I gave you a chance," Rogers said quietly. Gartok charged forward, his massive axe raised high. The weapon descended with enough force to shatter stone. Rogers raised his shield, and the axe struck vibranium with a sound like a thunderclap. The impact sent shockwaves across the battlefield, knocking nearby orcs off their feet. But Rogers stood unmoved. The axe had not dented his shield, had not even scratched it. Gartok stared in disbelief. "What sorcery is this?" "Not sorcery. Science!" Rogers stepped forward and punched the warlord in the stomach. The blow lifted Gartok off his feet and sent him flying backward into his own warriors. He crashed into a group of orc warriors, bowling them over like pins. When he struggled to his feet, there was genuine fear in his eyes for the first time in decades. "Impossible," the warlord gasped. "No human has such strength." "I'm not like other humans," Rogers admitted. "But I'm still just a man, and I'm giving you one more chance. Withdraw your forces or I'll go through every single one of you." Gartok's pride would not allow retreat. He rallied his warriors, calling on shamanic magic to enhance their strength and fury. The orcs came at Rogers in a coordinated assault, hundreds of them attacking from all angles simultaneously. Rogers moved through them like a dancer, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to track multiple threats at once. Shield block, punch, leg sweep, shield throw that took down a dozen orcs before returning to his hand. Jumping kick that sent an orc warrior crashing through a barricade. It was brutal, efficient, and utterly one-sided. The defenders of Lakeshire watched from their secondary positions, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. This wasn't a battle, it was a demonstration of absolute superiority. Rogers wasn't struggling, wasn't tiring, wasn't even breathing hard despite facing thousands of opponents. Commander Valorgard arrived with the 7th Legion 6 hours later, half the estimated time, having pushed his troops to their absolute limit. He crested the ridge overlooking Lakeshire, expecting to find ruins and slaughter. Instead, he found Captain Rogers sitting on the bridge, surrounded by unconscious orcs, calmly drinking water from a canteen that one of the grateful defenders had brought him. "Captain Rogers," Valorgard said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "You held them? Alone? For 6 hours?" Rogers stood and surveyed the battlefield. "Most of them retreated after I took down their leadership. The ones who insisted on fighting are unconscious but alive. I'd appreciate it if you could take them prisoner rather than executing them. Even enemies deserve fair treatment." "Fair treatment," Valorgard repeated numbly. "You fought 5,000 orcs, and you want us to show them mercy. They were following orders from their warlord. That doesn't make them evil, just misguided. Where I come from, we believe in rehabilitation, not revenge." The commander looked at the hundreds of unconscious orcs scattered across the battlefield, then at Rogers's spotless shield and barely ruffled uniform. "I don't think my world is ready for your kind of mercy, Captain." Word of the Red Ridge miracle, as it came to be known, spread across the Alliance territories within days. Bards sang songs about the champion in blue, who held a bridge against 5,000 orcs. Priests proclaimed it divine intervention. Military strategists tried to understand the tactics he'd employed. And common people began to believe that perhaps, finally, they had a champion who could turn the tide of Azeroth's endless wars. But not everyone was pleased by Rogers's growing fame. In the shadows of Stormwind, SI-7 agents compiled reports for their mysterious benefactors. In the depths of the Undercity, forsaken apothecaries studied samples of blood that their spies had collected from Rogers's battlefields. And in Orgrimmar, capital of the Horde, War Chief Sylvanas Windrunner listened to reports of this new Alliance asset with calculating interest. "A human warrior who can defeat entire armies alone," she mused, her undead features showing no emotion. "This changes the balance of power significantly." Her champion, a massive orc warrior named Varrock Sourfang, stood at attention nearby. "With respect, War Chief, the reports may be exaggerated. No single warrior, however skilled, can truly defeat thousands. And yet our own scouts confirm the reports from Redridge. 5,000 of Gartok's warriors, defeated by one man." Sylvanas's glowing eyes narrowed. "We must determine if this Rogers can be turned to our cause, or if he cannot. We must find a way to neutralize him." "He fights for the Alliance, War Chief. He won't betray them. Everyone has a price, Saurfang. Everyone has something they want. Find out what Captain Rogers wants, and we'll decide how to proceed." In Stormwind, Rogers was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. Crowds gathered wherever he went. Citizens bowed or tried to touch his uniform as though it could grant blessings. The Cathedral of Light had begun, including references to him in their sermons, calling him the Light's Champion, despite his repeated explanations that he had no connection to their religion. "This is getting out of hand," he told Sarah one evening, as they watched the crowd gathered in Cathedral Square from a library window. "They're treating me like a god." "To them you might as well be," Sarah replied. "The common people of Azeroth live in constant fear. Fear of demons, undead, dragons, old gods, faction warfare. You represent something they've never had before. Absolute protection. A champion who cannot be corrupted, cannot be killed, cannot be stopped." "But I can be stopped. I'm not invincible, and I'm definitely not incorruptible. Everyone has breaking points." Have you found yours yet? Rogers was quiet for a long moment. No, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That night, Rogers's breaking point nearly found him. He was awakened from sleep by a psychic pressure that seemed to press against his mind like a physical weight. The air in his quarters grew heavy, and shadows gathered in corners that no shadow should have occupied. "Captain Rogers," whispered a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Such strength, such righteousness, such delicious potential. Rogers grabbed his shield and stood, scanning the room for threats. "Show yourself." The shadows coalesced into a vaguely humanoid form, tall, slender, with eyes that gleamed like distant stars. "I am a servant of the old gods, the true powers of Azeroth. We have watched your battles with great interest." "Old gods," Rogers repeated, remembering Sarah's lessons about the cosmic entities imprisoned beneath Azeroth's surface. The ones that corrupt everything they touch. Corrupt is such an ugly word, the shadow entity purred. "We offer enlightenment, freedom from the chains of mortality and morality. You could be so much more than a simple soldier, Captain. Join us, and we will grant you power beyond imagination." "I've heard that before," Rogers replied. "The answer is no." The entity's laugh was like scraping glass. "You don't understand. We're not offering. We're taking." The shadows lunged forward, attempting to engulf Rogers and force corruption directly into his mind. What happened next surprised even the old god's servant. Rogers's mind, enhanced by the super soldier serum and fortified by decades of mental discipline, resisted the corruption absolutely. The entity's psychic tendrils slid off his consciousness like water off glass. The soldier's will was simply too strong, too focused, too pure to allow even a toehold for corruption. "Impossible," the entity hissed. "All mortals can be broken. All minds can be twisted." "Not this one," Rogers said. He swung his shield through the shadow entity. "The vibranium shouldn't have been able to affect something that existed partially outside physical reality, but the force of the blow and the purity of Rogers' intent somehow connected. The entity screamed and dissolved, banished back to whatever dark place had spawned it. Rogers stood alone in his quarters, breathing heavily, not from exertion, but from the sheer wrongness of what he'd just experienced. The corruption had felt like drowning in oil, like being suffocated by despair and madness. That people on this world dealt with such threats regularly horrified him. He reported the incident to King Anduin the next morning. The young king's face grew grave as he listened. "The old gods are taking an interest in you. That's deeply concerning. Their corruption has destroyed kingdoms, toppled empires, driven entire races to madness. But I resisted it," Rogers pointed out. "This time," Prophet Velen said, materializing from a shaft of light. The ancient Draenei's expression was troubled. "The old gods are patient, Captain Rogers. They have been imprisoned for millennia. They will not give up after one failed attempt. They will study you, probe for weaknesses, and strike again when you are vulnerable. Then I'll resist them again." "Your confidence is admirable," Velen said gently. "But even the strongest wills can be broken given sufficient time and pressure. The old gods do not simply assault the mind, they twist reality itself. They corrupt from within, turning your own thoughts and feelings against you." Rogers met the prophet's glowing gaze steadily. "I've faced down bullies my whole life. These old gods are just bigger bullies with fancier powers. The answer doesn't change. You stand up to them. You don't give in. You don't compromise. You fight. Anduin smiled slightly. You truly believe it's that simple? I believe making it complicated is how they win. Evil is evil, whether it's a cosmic entity or a two-bit thug. You oppose it. Period. In the weeks that followed, Rogers continued his work defending Alliance territories. He stopped a Gnoll invasion in Westfall. He cleared out cultists who had taken over a village in Duskwood. He even ventured into the dark depths of the Dead Mines, the very headquarters of the Defias Brotherhood, and emerged with Edwin Van Cleef in custody rather than dead. That last action caused significant controversy. Van Cleef was responsible for countless deaths, had orchestrated attacks on Stormwind itself, and many felt he deserved immediate execution. Rogers insisted on a trial, on due process, on giving even this notorious criminal a chance to answer for his crimes in a court of law. You're too soft, Gen Greymane told him after a heated council meeting. This isn't your world, Captain. We don't have the luxury of mercy. Then maybe it's time you made that luxury a priority, Rogers replied. Because from where I'm standing, your practical approach has kept this world locked in endless conflict. Maybe trying something different wouldn't be the worst idea. The Worgen Lord's eyes flashed with anger, but he couldn't argue with the results. Every action Rogers had taken had saved lives. Not just Alliance lives, but enemy combatants who might have been killed in more conventional military operations, prisoners who could be questioned, criminals who could reform, enemies who might become allies. It was a radical approach for Azeroth, and it was gaining traction among the younger generation who had grown tired of endless warfare. But the peace couldn't last. 3 weeks after the Red Ridge miracle, a new crisis emerged that would test Rogers in ways he hadn't experienced before. The sky above Stormwind turned black, not with clouds or smoke, but with an absolute absence of light that seemed to devour even the sun. From this darkness descended a fleet of massive ships, not the organic bio-horrors of the Burning Legion, but mechanical constructs of impossible complexity. The void, Prophet Velen breathed as alarms rang throughout the city. The shadow has taken physical form. From the largest vessel emerged beings of living shadow and starlight, void entities that existed partially outside normal reality. They weren't demons or undead, or any threat Azeroth had faced before. They were manifestations of entropy itself, beings that sought to unmake creation and return everything to the cold silence of the void. Leading them was something that called itself Herald of the End, a towering entity that seemed to flicker between existence and non-existence, its form constantly shifting between matter and antimatter. People of Azeroth, it spoke, and its voice resonated in every mind on the planet simultaneously. Your reality is an aberration, a painful mistake in the perfection of the void. We have come to correct this error. You will be returned to nothing. Fighting is pointless. Resistance is meaningless. Accept the silence. Rogers stood on the battlements of Stormwind Keep, shield in hand, and looked up at the impossible fleet above. Sarah stood beside him, her face pale with terror. "Can you fight that?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," Rogers admitted, "but I'm going to try." The void entities descended upon Stormwind like a dark tide. They weren't simply attacking, they were unmaking reality wherever they touched. Buildings didn't collapse. They ceased to have ever existed. People didn't die. They were erased from history itself, with even memories of them fading like morning mist. Rogers charged forward to meet them, and for the first time since arriving on Azeroth, he felt genuine resistance. His shield connected with a void entity, and the impact sent feedback through his arm. Not pain exactly, but a sensation of wrongness that made his enhanced senses rebel. The entity he'd struck didn't shatter or explode. It simply dispersed and reformed, as though physical attacks meant nothing to it. Its companions moved to surround him, tendrils of anti-reality reaching out to unmake the very atoms of his body. "You are persistent," the Herald of the End observed, descending from its vessel. "But you cannot fight nothingness. You cannot defeat entropy. All things end, Captain Rogers. Even you." Rogers planted his feet and raised his shield. "I've heard a lot of villains make a lot of speeches about why I should give up or surrender or accept defeat. You know what they all have in common? They're all wrong." He threw his shield at the Herald. The vibranium disc passed through its shifting form harmlessly, but Rogers had already moved. He caught the returning shield and used its momentum to leap higher than should have been possible, coming down with all his strength focused into a single punch aimed at the Herald's core. The impact created a shockwave that cleared the void entities from a 100-foot radius. The Herald staggered, its form destabilizing. For the first time, something approaching emotion flickered across its incomprehensible features. Surprise. "You touched me. How?" "Turns out absolute conviction is pretty effective against existential dread," Rogers replied. He pressed his advantage, striking again and again. Each blow drove the Herald back, forced it to maintain its physical form rather than dispersing into pure void energy. The Alliance forces rallied. Mages launched spells of pure arcane energy, the antithesis of void corruption. Paladins channeled the light, creating barriers that held back the encroaching darkness. Priests sang hymns that bolstered the spirits of defenders and weakened the void entity's hold on reality. And at the center of it all, Rogers fought with the determination that had defined his entire life. He couldn't just punch these enemies into submission. They were concepts given form, abstractions made manifest. But he could embody something stronger than their nihilism. He could represent hope, courage, and the stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had always been humanity's greatest strength. The battle raged for hours. Stormwind burned in places, but it endured. Citizens who had been erased were restored as priests managed to anchor reality against the void's influence. The dark ships in the sky began to waver as the Herald of the End found itself unable to overcome one simple soldier's absolute conviction. "This is meaningless," the Herald insisted, even as Rogers's relentless assault drove it backward. "You delay the inevitable. The void will consume all. Heat death awaits every star. Entropy is the final state of all things." "Maybe," Rogers panted, showing the first signs of actual fatigue since arriving on Azeroth. "But not today, and not here. Not while I'm still standing." He grabbed the Herald. Somehow his enhanced grip found purchase on its insubstantial form, and threw it with all his strength. The entity crashed into its own flagship with enough force to destabilize the vessel's reality anchors. The ship flickered, wavered, and then imploded, pulling the Herald and dozens of other void entities into a collapsing dimensional pocket. The remaining void forces retreated, their assault broken by the loss of their commander. The darkness overhead receded, revealing Azeroth's sun once more. Exhausted defenders collapsed in relief, while priests moved through the streets, healing wounds and consecrating ground to ensure no void corruption remained. Rogers stood in the middle of Cathedral Square, shield dented for the first time since his arrival, uniform torn and burned in places. He looked utterly exhausted but remained on his feet, scanning for additional threats with the discipline of a soldier who knew the battle wasn't over until every enemy was confirmed down. "Thank you, Steve Rogers," Sarah said softly. "Thank you for everything." And though she couldn't know it, though no magic or science in Azeroth could have detected it, somewhere in the quantum spaces between dimensions, a soldier smiled. Because even separated by infinite distance and countless realities, some bonds transcended the barriers between worlds. The legend of the champion in blue would endure on Azeroth. The lessons he'd taught would be passed down through generations. His example would inspire heroes for centuries to come. But the man himself, Steve Rogers, Captain America, was already moving forward. Already preparing for the next battle. Already ready to stand against whatever darkness threatened innocent lives. Because that's what heroes did. They never stopped fighting. They never gave up. They never surrendered, and somewhere in the infinite multiverse, that would always be true.